All right, back now here with our 10-minute war, a little homage to the classic 10-year war between Woody and Bo when we bring in our good friend and perhaps one and only reasonable bucknut, the one and only Mark Rogers, the voice of college football. He himself has a fantastic channel that you want to be following right here on YouTube, especially now during the offseason. This is when you get all the up-to-date information on all of these teams you're looking for when those win totals start coming out and those preseason odds start coming out, and you can start winning bets like I did last year with Utah 15-1 to win the Pac-12, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to Universal Studios for a family vacation here in a couple of weeks. Mark, good to see you again, man. How are you?
That's not bad. I better start listening to you, Steve.
Here's the thing. I don't get a lot right, but the ones I get right are really right, brother. I'll say that.
Well, I'm going to say I forget how we came to the conclusion of this naming of this segment, the 10-minute war, but considering that Bo was up 5-4 to 1, maybe we should call it maybe the Earl Bruce. We should go to the Earl Bruce Bo Schembechler 5-4 in favor of Ohio State. I didn't think that one through. I'm
a real big believer in honoring tradition and legacy, Mark, which is why I really think we need to honor the 10-minute war. And also because Bo finished 5-4-1 and Ohio State didn't score an offensive touchdown in those final 3 years, but who's counting? I don't even know where to go. I'll tell you how I started out the show today. All right. When you're under the thumb of Jim Harbaugh, it's mostly good, sometimes bad. 1 out of 7 years, great. It's always weird. It's just always going to be weird, man. And you know, in the end, we lost a defensive coordinator that all of us realized wasn't going to be here more than 2 or 3 years at the most anyway, because he's a wunderkind, right? He might be the defensive Sean McVay. We don't know. Okay. Josh Gaddis was already interviewing for head coaching jobs. He wasn't going to be here more than another year anyway. I mean, we don't have any real serious players in the transfer portal right now. It's just all the drama. We had 10 guys decommit from our top 10 recruiting class. We had 10 decommitments from that class. And I went and looked at where all those kids are. Most of them are at like Massachusetts, Bowling Green. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just, with Harbaugh, he just embraces madness. He's attracted to it. He lives, I think enjoys it. This is just going to be heavily dramatic. And now that it's likely, maybe you disagree, I think the NFL showed this last offseason that his stock is just not there anymore. And he tried one last Hail Mary down the stretch with the Vikings, and it didn't work out. I think he's going to be our coach here for the foreseeable future, all right? And so I think for people like me are just going to have to embrace the madness, just going to have to realize that if you're going to have Jim Harbaugh as your coach, you just have to know it's going to be weird. He's an agent of chaos, and just accept that, man. And so that's just the quirk I think we're going to have to learn to accept over here up north. What do you think, Mark?
And it must be the one quirk that does not align with Bo Schembechler, because Bo was anything but controversial in regards to, you knew where he stood, you know what he was thinking, you knew everything was all in on Michigan and where he was going to be from season to season. So Jim Harbaugh has obviously idolized Bo Schembechler in every other facet for the most part. But this one, you know, I got to think, Steve, we live in a world, in a society, and especially as it's reflected on social media, of extremists. And usually those extremes go to the negative because that stirs up more controversy and discussion and pushes more buttons. And for this, it's been that the Michigan program's coming off the rails. But again, there is no evidence of this. There are coaching departures everywhere. And you mentioned Mike Macdonald. He was going to leave anyway. Who doesn't leave the job that he had for the job that he just gained? Everyone does it.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a logical move. Josh Gaddis, from what I'm hearing and gaining more background on him, it's not like he hasn't burned bridges before. And also the statement that he, I think it's been confirmed, made to of a lot of the veteran players on the offensive side of the ball wasn't the classiest move on his part. And Josh Gaddis, for winning the Broyles Award, what was his experience, resume? What did his track record look like pre-2021? Was it that outstanding?
No. There was 3 games. There were 3 games in 2019 that it looked like a speed and space offense, but they still lost 4 games. In 2020, Joe Milton was his guy. That was an abject disaster. And so this year he's just like, bleep it, man. Let's just run Jimmy's offense out of a spread formation. And lo and behold, man, they led the nation in most plays of 50 yards or more. So he got the Broyles Award by becoming mini Jimmy, by running Harbaugh's philosophy. That's how he got that award.
Yeah, and then we look at recruiting, which is, of course, the lifeblood, and I'm not seeing decommits. There was one guy in question, Cavante Henry, out of California, who was still not signed before National Signing Day, and he opted to go to Oklahoma. But besides that, the class was locked down. The 2023, there was a decommit the other day, but this is happening with everyone and always has in this modern age of recruiting. Everything looks good.
But Mark,
good.
along those lines, you follow this year round. Along the lines of what you're just saying, how many schools have, I'll bet you Clemson has not had 10 decommits the entire time Dabo Swinney's been the coach. All right? How many schools have 10 decommits in a class and still sign the number 8 class in the country? Who does that, Mark? I'll tell you who does that. Jim friggin' Harbaugh does, man. The dude is the Joker, okay? He is just an agent of chaos. No one else would even try. You couldn't try to get 10 commitments in a class and still sign the number 8 recruiting class in the country. By the way, and that's without signing a 5-star or 4-star quarterback. You and I both know it is hard to have a top 10 class without signing an elite quarterback prospect. So no elite quarterback prospect, 10 decommits, he still gets the number 8 class. The year before, he has no contract. He is not under contract. And he goes silent for a month. He still signs a 5-star quarterback and a 5-star tailback. This past Saturday, the number 1 rated running back in Michigan, Cole Cabana, chose Michigan over Michigan State.
And he's a Michigan State fan.
Yes.
From what I hear.
And like his best friend is already committed to Michigan State. Yeah. This is just this guy's natural habitat, man. He just seems to, he freaking just thrives in this stuff. Jim Harbaugh, having him as your football coach is the college football equivalent. He's Christopher Walken in the red bandana scene in The Deer Hunter. That's what it is. And so you just have to sign up for it. That's just how he rolls, for better or for worse. That's just what you got going on.
Yeah, so he's back, and he's made a pledge to stay for as long as they're going to have him. So I am having a hard time believing that Michigan is falling apart and falling off the rails, because, again, that's just talk. And I understand where that comes from in looking at the scene that is the craziness of Jim Harbaugh, and then trying to determine what's going to be the collateral damage off of that. But it's limited, and he knows what he's doing amidst all that. And so the tangibles still line up that this is a top 10 program in the country. I'm going to believe that it's going to continue to proceed that way. I believe, J.J. McCarthy had glowing things to say about most likely the new offensive coordinator or co-offensive coordinator, Matt Weiss. So I think this is a really good program. Do I see it elevating and continuing that upward ascent? I don't think so. I just think that there are certain natural, the recruiting issue just in regards to geography plays against it. And so I see it settling in that 10-2 range, 9-3 range. And whether Michigan fans are happy or not with that, it depends which ones I run into.
Let's play a fun game, like they used to do on Deal or No Deal. Or you take the deal.
Yeah.
If you were going to keep going, which case would you have chosen, right? So let's do this for fun. Let's assume that 6 hours into a 9-hour interview, the Vikings and Harbaugh do not suddenly mutually decide, on second thought, nah, and go ahead and consummate the relationship. And Michigan is sitting here, as you and I anticipated a week ago when we chatted, in a full-throated coaching search. I want to throw a list of names at you from a Buckeye fan perspective, if they would have gotten your attention at all, that if you think they would have been any kind of difference maker at all. And I'm going to do it in order of based on everything I've read, heard, who I think, how I think the pecking order for a new coach would have gone, okay? Number 1 is Fickell. I do believe that Michigan would have forced him to say no, and I think you and I probably both think he would say no. Although Angelique Shingelis over at the Detroit News, who's a Cincinnati grad, says there's no way she thinks he would have said no if Michigan would have called. Okay, but that would have been number one. He checks every single box of the profile of a Michigan coach because he checks every single box of a profile of an Ohio State coach, and the schools are, of course, intertwined. All right. So Luke Fickell, if Jim Harbaugh had moved on, Luke Fickell announces the next Michigan football coach, your immediate thoughts are what?
Well, that's the most unique name that you're going to bring up for that connection with Ohio State. So the Ohio State fan's going to be hurt by that emotionally. Now, what's it going to turn into in regards to the rivalry, wins and losses? Luke Fickell, yes, gets Ohio State's attention. He is as good as what he has shown at Cincinnati over the past 4 seasons. It's pretty remarkable. And I think then with a higher class athlete, not the 55th rated talent in the nation there at Cincinnati, that would be one to be reckoned with.
The next call, if Fickell would have said no, the Buckeye roots are too strong, I believe Matt Rule of the Carolina Panthers would have been the next call. Thoughts?
So Matt Rule at Temple did a remarkable job. You know, they were winning 10 games and taking down some pretty highly thought of Power 5 teams. Of course, he does what he does at Baylor. So by all accounts, I think Matt Rule, although it wouldn't have hurt Buckeye Nation because there's no connection there, obviously, but in regards to long-term success, I think Matt Rule, I'm going to go with the pecking order thus far that Fickell, even aside from the emotional part of it, would be the slam dunk, home run hire, and Rule just a notch below that.
The third call, I believe, would have been to Bill O'Brien, former Big Ten coach of the year at Penn State, 4-time division winner in the NFL, current Alabama OC.
I am truly amazed and have been for all this time at what Bill O'Brien achieved at Penn State. To be able to keep that relevant, that situation, and go 8-4, 7-5. That place was such a
You mean when they had like 40 players on the
know.
roster after the Sandusky probation scandal? Yeah.
Yeah, for him to hold that together, I'm thinking in the aftermath of that, who that's a high 3-star, even 4-star in that range, why would they go to Penn State when they can go to all these other places when it's being talked about in the way that it was? It was such a black mark, and he held it together. I think the guy's a tremendous game planner, X's and O's, tactician, rubs people the wrong way at times. I don't know necessarily that he ranks with the other two because of that.
Finally, Mike Hart. I believe one of those Hart, 4 names would have been your Michigan coach in that order.
Yeah, he's obviously the X factor from an experience end of this, but at the same time, I think more and more we're getting comfortable with guys that do not have head coaching experience, that have a certain cachet, that obviously either played at a high level and now have transferred that onto the coaching field and have shown us that they can handle a position or an offense or a defense. And then they have that certain, Marcus Freeman, of course, comes to mind at Notre Dame. And so I think that might have been one that Michigan might have taken a few hits for. He may have had to grow into the job, but certainly I think he's coming. Yeah, he's on the ascension.
Okay, one more. Jim Harbaugh.
Where does he rank in that 5?
Yeah.
Fickell 1, Harbaugh 2, Rule 3. I'm going to edge him past Matt Rule.
It would have been an interesting search. I would have been I would have been fascinated. I mean, I'm fairly convinced that Fickell would say no, but I've listened to Angelique's case for why she doesn't think that over the weekend. It would have been an interesting drama for sure. Then does he let us dangle out there? And although right now we'd have been the only school in the coaching carousel, so it's not like if Harbaugh had left in December and we're competing with 6 other blue blood schools for the same coaching candidate pool. There's one more name I forgot to mention that I think probably also would have been called before Mike Hart. Matt Campbell.
I'm high on Matt Campbell. Their season this past year was a disappointment considering just they cycled into a year in which they were supposed to do big things because of all the offensive personnel coming back, and it just didn't happen. But that doesn't deter me from thinking that Matt Campbell's one of the top 5 to 8 coaches in college football. And I would put him ahead of Harbaugh. Fickell, Campbell, Harbaugh, Rule, Hart. O'Brien, Hart. That's where we
Well,
were.
you know, I love Matt Campbell. I see him up close and personal every day where I live. The one thing from a Michigan fan perspective, he checks absolutely every box, triple checks several of them. The one thing that did give me cause for pause this year, and you just sort of referenced it, that offense with all that experience and firepower coming back never kind of took that extra step, right? And you can understand why he's trying to play complementary football and rebuilding the Iowa State program. And I think people that don't know Iowa State's history don't understand that if we've come to the point that 7-win seasons are disappointments at Iowa State, they've never had a 10-win season in the history of the damn program. Okay. And their season win total this year was 9 heading into the year. They've never even won 10. 2020 was the first time they've ever even been in or won a major bowl in the history of the program. From a Power 5 perspective, it's quite possible this is the weakest tradition of any Power 5 school at Iowa State. But what concerns me as you translate this to Michigan, though, is that offense with all those guys, maybe the best running back in school history, maybe the best quarterback in school history, first team all Big 12 receiver, an offensive line that brought back 4 starters from a line that was the finalist for the Joe Moore Award last year. You expected that to kind of take an extra step, and it did not this year. And so that kind of concerns me because I think Michigan has learned under Harbaugh that you cannot, unless you're recruiting at a Georgia level where you have 2 or 3 Devin Bushes on your team at the same time, and Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker, you cannot complementary football your way to winning a national championship. Hell, most years you can't win the Big Ten that way. Okay, so that was the one thing about him that I was concerned about after what I saw this year is that offense with all that experience didn't take another step, which makes me think, is that just a philosophical thing with him maybe?
Well, it's always an interesting projection to try to make, to take the Pat Fitzgerald or the Mark Stoops, who's now gaining better talent at Kentucky, but for what he's done for the last 6 or 7 years at Kentucky, Matt Campbell, to say, okay, if they did have the Jimmies and Joes, what would they do with it? And I don't think that's just – I think that's a case-by-case situation, but I've got full confidence in Matt Campbell being a top-flight coach, top 5 to 10 coach in the country. I think I would choose him over Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Not that I wouldn't think about it, but I choose Campbell.
Mark, always good to get an outsider's perspective, man, and good to talk to you, my friend. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us again this week. All right, take care.
Thanks, Steve.